Hey guys, welcome to Priceless B-Movies. I'm your host, Colin Price. Well, here it is. We got the Avengers, then we got Age of Ultron, then we got Captain America Civil War, which, let's face it, should have just been called the Avengers Civil War. I don't know why they're doing things the way they're doing at the MCU, but the point is that now they're saying, okay, we're going to take a break from the Avengers, and we're going to introduce a new property, a character that hasn't been in a live-action film before. We're going to introduce some new elements. We're going to break away from the Avengers and what they're doing and totally make this its own thing. And now that we've got the film, it opens with about 25 to 30 seconds, a new studio logo that showcases the Avengers. Doctor Strange. Benedict Cumberbatch, or as you know him, the guy from every other sci-fi fantasy movie today, plays Dr. Stephen Strange. He's a brilliant neurosurgeon who's just a bit too big for his britches because even though he thinks he's brilliant, he's also kind of an asshole as well. He ends up, very early on in the movie, he ends up in this horrible car crash, surprisingly graphic car crash considering kind of what Marvel usually gives us in terms of violence. And this accident ends up destroying both of his hands. He goes overseas to Nepal and ends up running into a very bald and very white-skinned Tilda Swinton, who says that she's going to awaken him and help him heal his body by healing his spirit or some mumbo-jumbo like this. And it's alright because as far back as I can think, there aren't too many comic book or superhero movies that start off anything like this. Before long, Cumberbatch is drawn further and further into this world of mysticism and interdimensional yada yada, and it's all fairly confusing. I just watched the movie and I don't even understand half of it, but it's fun to look at. And of course, it doesn't take long for him to get caught up in this ongoing war between these magicians, and now there's one of them who's turned bad and wants to hand the world over to this dark interdimensional thing that's really just a big purple head that kind of looks like those old pin things you would stick your hand through and watch the pins come out. Now, I have a lot to say about Marvel and DC, and I touched very briefly on my opinions on both studios in my last video, my Q&A video. And the MCU has really been rubbing me the wrong way lately. I don't like how they have to make everything about Iron Man and the Avengers all the time. I don't like kind of how they treat their supporting characters. And when I heard so much positive buzz about this movie, especially that now it's up for an Academy Award for visual effects, I just kind of bent to it and decided to check it out. And, I'm usually pro DC and kind of anti-Marvel in a way because DC is just kind of what I grew up with and what I care much more about. But I promised myself that I would be totally cool and fair in this review. That being said, there are some things about Doctor Strange that I really liked, and there's some things that I really didn't like. First, the good. Benedict Cumberbatch is really good in this movie. This is some of the strongest acting I've seen from him. I haven't really cared for a lot of the movies that I've seen where he's done just motion capture and he's done it because he's always just kind of him. I also really didn't care for him in Star Trek Into Darkness. I thought that he was trying a little too hard in some places, and I just couldn't really see him as a threat. I was very concerned about how he would handle this role, and I was really pleasantly surprised that he not only did not screw it up, but he was absolutely amazing. His performance is the high point of this film outside of the special effects. Speaking of the special effects, there's a lot in here to look at. This is a great movie to, sit back and, have a couple drinks and go, whoa. 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 And while a lot of the look of the film seems to be lifted from other movies, there is some stuff that's very Inception, and there is some stuff that's very Batman Begins, and there is some stuff that's... But what you get with this movie is that it takes a lot of those kinds of ideas and a lot of those looks, and it expands on them. Before long, you get some really interesting fight scenes where you're kind of struggling visually to keep up with what's going on. And not in a bad way. It's not like it's going to induce headaches in you, but in a way that it almost makes you want to go back and watch a lot of these fights and fantasy sequences again to catch every little detail and every little building flying around and every little street that's turned up into itself and every other crazy kaleidoscope image that comes up in this film. I almost, now that I've seen it once, want to watch it again just so I can slow-mo through those scenes and appreciate the amount of detail that went into them. Also, while I've had a problem with the MCU and kind of how they've made their movies kind of too light and too comical, even for my taste, and let's face it, I love comedy. I just don't think that you should have so much comedy in an action film that all of a sudden you're not taking it seriously anymore, and it's like, who cares if these characters live or die? They're just going to be cracking jokes the whole time. Doctor Strange has a lot of great humor in it, but it seems like they are taking some steps to make it a bit more gritty and a bit more serious. A lot of the humor in this isn't as juvenile as it is in some of the Avengers films. It's actually very situational, and it's very clever in a lot of ways. There were a couple of times where I heard a joke, and it took me a second, and I'm like, oh, got it, because yeah. And normally with the MCU, their jokes aren't that smart. But this film surprised me in that way. Now that I'm done talking about the good, let's talk about the not so good. This movie does have a lot of the same weaknesses that the other films in the MCU tend to have. And what I'm going to say right here now is Benedict Cumberbatch is great as Doctor Strange, but here's the thing. In a movie that's all about multiple dimensions, he's the only character who's allowed to have more than one. Basically, there's him. Then there's Tilda Swinton, who at the end of the day is nothing more than kind of the Yoda character. She doesn't have a character outside of the wise old sage. They tried to, later on in the film, give her a little more context and give her but it doesn't really work. At least it didn't really work for me. I couldn't see her as any more than the "now you can never fail if you don't try," or whatever the hell that quote is from Empire Strikes Back. I couldn't really get into that. Then we have Rachel McAdams. She's the love interest. That's all she is. She's in something like maybe 10 or 15 minutes of the whole movie. And after the first part of the movie, she disappears for a good deal of time and only really comes in to be a comic relief for another scene later. That's about it. It's a real waste of a love interest and a supporting character. And then we get to the real mess in the film, which is the bad guy. God, will Marvel please stop casting these brilliant actors as these intriguing villains? Because all they do is, you have, what was it? Tom Hiddleston was Loki. That's the good one. They wasted James Spader as Ultron. They wasted Christopher Eccleston in Thor: The Dark World. They wasted Hugo Weaving in Captain America. They bring these guys in, make them really dull bad guys, and then they're dead by the end of the movie. So there isn't even a chance to bring them back later and expand on them. No, the MCU is terrible when it comes to this, and they did it yet again in Doctor Strange. We have Mads Mikkelsen, Le Chiffre from Casino Royale, probably the best Bond film of all time, and he's got nothing to do in this movie but sit there with these burned away eyelids looking all kind of retro, kind of almost like a horror movie villain, and he has nothing to do for the whole movie except be the bad guy. I couldn't tell you anything about his character after watching the movie other than he's the bad guy. What DC really has over Marvel right now is that their villains are far more interesting. Also, the story, let's face it, this has pretty been there, done that. It's a typical origin story, and while the effects are amazing and the acting is as great as it can be, you've seen this before. You haven't seen some of the special effects, but in terms of story, you've seen this before. And for all the hate that movies like Suicide Squad get, where it's kind of like, you have a weak villain and all it amounts to is at the end, there's this big glowing dangerous thing in the sky and it's the threat, yada yada. That's exactly what you get here. I really don't see a difference between the two. I think that there is a bias, and I think that there's definitely some things that Marvel does and it's more acceptable, and DC really needs to just try a little harder to be original and stand out from this, because I guess Marvel's just kind of claimed these cliches, like it's cool when they do it, but if DC does it, they're ripping it off or they're doing whatever, all that mindless movie politics bullshit that is permeating comic book culture today. When it comes down to it, Doctor Strange is an incredibly entertaining movie. I was surprised at how much fun I had with it, but it does fall short in the same places that every MCU movie falls short. I'm going to be generous and give Doctor Strange 3 stars out of 4. I had a lot of fun with this movie, but at the same time, Marvel really does have to get over themselves. They have to break free from their formula a little more, and it seems that every time they say that they're going to do that, No, I mean, the parallels between this and Iron Man alone are extraordinary. You can't avoid them no matter how much you try. They're not breaking new ground in terms of these stories, but they are still fun to watch, so I gotta give them that. They just need to kind of work a little harder on giving their characters better stuff to work with. That's my review of Doctor Strange. Stay tuned, I got a lot more coming, especially now that I'm situated in my new surroundings. I'm going to be getting back to doing these reviews a lot more frequently, so stay tuned for more Priceless B movies.